In this episode, I talk about why titanium nibs matter, the ethics of waste in pen manufacturing, and my first job. Hey folks, Brian Goulet here of GouletPens.com, and it is episode number 159 of Goulet Q&A. Happy to be back here again. Went a little bit long last week, so I think I'm going to try and go a little shorter this week. Of course, I always say that right at the beginning, and then by the time I get to the end, I'm like, you know, that really wasn't any shorter, but we'll give it a shot here. I'm taking fewer questions this week. It's been difficult because I've been getting a lot of really good questions, but I'm only taking 6 today, so I'm trying to limit it a little bit. Before I get into the questions though, let me just kind of start out with what's been going on. Rachel and I have been laying low. We just found out that we're going to be, Rachel's sister is pregnant. We just found out that we're going to have a nephew, which is cool because her sister already has a daughter, so now she's gonna want each. We have one of each, it's kind of cool, so we'll be able to share some fun stuff there. Of course, anything we would have been happy, but we got to find that out this past weekend. So that's been pretty fun. Weather's been a little kooky, it's been really hot, now it might snow this weekend, who knows? That's what it's like here in Virginia, so a little bit wacky, but it's been really like unseasonably warm around here recently. All of our like trees are blooming and stuff like that, and then there's a threat of snow. I don't know, it's gonna be wild. It is daylight savings time coming up this weekend. If you haven't gotten the memo on that yet, if you happen to be watching from the US or anybody else that recognizes daylight savings, you're gonna lose an hour going into Sunday, so just be sure that you're setting your clock correctly. So that's coming up. You know, we've been pretty busy around here. We have a lot of stuff that's coming. I've been talking for weeks about new products that are coming. We had a couple of exciting things launch. One of them is the Visconti Brunelleschi. The Visconti Brunelleschi. So that's this big object that I'm holding here. Comes in this sweet bag. So this is a limited edition pen, which Visconti has been known to do. Comes in this gigantic box with the Visconti logo, and inside said box is a little piece of foam there. Pretty nice little presentation, got to admit. It's got a little card. This is number 34. There's only 388 of these pens. Comes with this little sweet tile, which we didn't have previously. We'd gotten a sample, didn't have the tile in it. It seems that the tile is actually glued into the box though, so be ready for that. If you want to get this tile out and use it as a paperweight or something, you're gonna have to rip it out of the box. Comes with terracotta traveling inkwell, which is pretty sweet. Comes with this little inkwell, which is kind of unique to this packaging here. Little eyedropper, and then the pen itself, which I won't go into a ton of detail because I went over it in Q&A a couple of weeks ago when I had the sample. It is this terracotta in resin pen, which is a new material for Visconti. So that's always pretty cool when they come up with something new. So it's not just straight up terracotta clay, because if that was the case, if you drop it, it would break. So it's terracotta infused with resin, kind of similar in feel to the Homo sapiens. So obviously a different color. It's got that clay look going on. It's got rose gold trim here. It does have the two-tone nib, so there's a little bit of a mismatch on the nib and the trim there. I still think this nib is gorgeous. It's a power filler, so it's got the sweet little vacuum action on the back here, which you just pull out and then fills like so. Pretty sweet. Hook safe lock. Love the cap mechanism on this pen. This one's particularly smooth too. And it seems like, you know, I've been looking at the threads that are cut on this hook safe lock, and they seem to be really clean on these Brunelleschi's. A little more so. I guess the material on the Homo sapiens doesn't always cut quite as clean. I know the ones on my personal are like, you can see just a little bit of machining on there, but these ones are super crisp. So I think the action is going to work really smooth on the cap. So that's pretty sweet to see. Been pretty popular so far already. We got shorted on our initial shipment of them, and so they're basically gone from what we had, but we've got more on order, so we will have more of them. So that's pretty cool, pretty exciting. Also, a new thing that we've gotten in this week is Graph on Faber-Castell. So I set that up for you a couple of weeks ago. I mentioned that we actually got some of the pens in. We had them up on the site for the last couple of weeks, but this is just an example of one of them. This is the classic Pernambuco. So this is actual wood. All platinum plating on the cap here and the trim, gold nib, very nice. The craftsmanship is outstanding. The fit and finish is incredible. This pen's a little bit in the higher end, in like the 500 range, but there's definitely some that are in a little bit lower end. So we're gonna have a couple of them. We're gonna have the Tomitio and then the Classic here. And then we're gonna release, you know, maybe a couple more models kind of throughout the spring and summer. So excited to have Graf von Faber-Castell in our line as well. Also have Karas Customs titanium nibs, which we did get a video out on that. Huge props to Jenny. She put a lot into that. Her and I shot some of the B-roll together, and you got to see us spring one of these nibs, which is easy to do. So watch that video if you want to kind of see how they perform. Really kind of a cool thing. Titanium nibs seem to be got kind of a buzz about them right now, so you can learn more about that there. Also got in the Pelican M405 Stresemann, I think is how you say it. Stresemann, I've heard it called, but there's no U, so Stresemann, I think, is the correct name for it. Nice color. This is a regular edition, so lately we have been getting a little bit more into Pelican, usually with the special editions and things like that, but this one is a regular edition that came out maybe in November of last year. We didn't pick it up right away just because we had a lot going on in the holidays, but we thought, you know what, we don't have any M405s regular. The brown tortoise that we've had has been pretty popular, so we wanted to offer this. So for those of you that are not familiar with it, it's similar in size to the Pelican M200, little bits fancier, a little bit more ornate. It's got some nice differences in like the finial. It's got an extra ring on the center band, extra ring back here on the finial. Of course, it's got the typical striping here like you would associate with Pelican, and you can kind of see through it if you hold it up to the light, so you can kind of see your ink level in there a little bit. Kind of cool. Of course, the gold nib is nice. And then I just wanted to show you kind of for perspective, I'll zoom in a little bit. I grabbed some different Pelican pens so I can show you size-wise kind of how it compares. So the M205 here, or sorry, 200, and then the M405, the difference between the 0 numbers and the 5 numbers at the end of the Pelican is whether it's gold or rhodium trimmed. And then I have a 605 here, so you can see the difference there. It definitely jumps up in size with the 6s, and then I'm gonna get one more in here with the 8. I don't have an M1000, wish I did. But there's the 800, so that gives you some idea, perspective of size. So the 200 and the 400 are the same size. It's a bit of a jump in price, a lot for the gold nib. And then you go up to the 6, it gets a little bigger, and then the 8 gets even bigger. So the 6 has a bigger nib than the 400, and then the 8 has an even bigger one. The nibs on the 200 and 400 are actually interchangeable. You can just unscrew them right out of the pen, and you can swap them with each other. So that's kind of neat. But they're similar in size there. Get a little bit of spring in the 400 and the 405. So that is available. So you can check that out now. What else have we got? The Pilot Con 40 as well. So we've known for a while, probably a year to a year and a half, that the Pilot is switching over their converters to the Con 40. It's just a clear plastic version of the converter. That's what they're moving to. They're getting rid of the Con 20, they're getting rid of the Con 50, they're keeping the Con 70, the big one, but they're getting rid of those two, and they're not going to be including the Metropolitan converter eventually. That's kind of a different even converter, but they're going to be including the Con 40 with all of those pens, replacing all those converters with the exception of the Con 70. So, you know, got some mixed feedback about that. A lot of people like that it's more clear. Some people like the agitator, some people don't. But it kind of is what it is. It's coming. We've known for a while that it's been coming, and they've had to kind of, you know, sell out of the Con 50s. They had a good stock of them, and we are now starting to see Con 40s come on some stuff. So we are swapping out images for anything our site that is now coming with a Con 40. We're trying to be diligent about that. But just, you know, understand that that's going to start to come in some pens, and we have them available separately now too. And then some stuff that we have coming soon. So this is one thing that's gotten a good amount of buzz. So Aurora has their pen called the 88, and that is coming in a limited edition with a flexible nib, and this is like old school kind of flex nib. So they were producing it with some older machinery of what they used to make flex nibs. They tried to bring flex nibs back, you know, they said in the 70s or so, and it just was not popular. So because of the popularity of flex nibs now, they've gotten some of that machinery out, kind of fixed it up, producing some of these nibs, and they I actually got to meet one of their nibmeisters, and he explained to me how he actually makes these things. It's rather involved. It has to do with actually thinning of the gold in certain parts. They have to cut the wings a little differently, so they cut the wings so that it's a little bit less material, so that it looks a little pointier, and so it's definitely some differences there, and it's really kind of like a traditional flex nib. So, but it's also very time consuming, they said, so they're not going to be producing a lot of them. So it's a limited number of each of those pens, and they're coming out with like one color. I know of, I think, 5 or 6 different colors that they're planning to come out with, but basically one color each month for the next however many months. And the blue one is the first one that's coming up, and then there's a red one after that. And then I don't know what order they're going to do beyond that, but it's going to be pretty darn limited. I think 188 of each pen color worldwide, so it's not a ton, but as far as I understand, that's kind of their capacity for producing these nibs. So don't be surprised if they are very, very limited and in hot demand. So once I actually get those in, I plan to talk about them a little bit more. Also, Aurora Blue Black is on the way. We are still waiting to get our full shipment of that, so you know, a lot of people are excited about that, and you can see other people online already have it, and we're kind of just waiting on more. And then Aurora, their Optima, they're coming out in this Rosa red, which is this beautiful, bright, vibrant red. So I'm pumped about that because I think it's, you know, red pens can be a little hit or miss. I think that one's really solid. So we'll have that one. It's got rhodium trim on it. Looks really good. And then the Conklin Mini Graph, which I don't have to show you here, but it's a very small kind of pocket pen. That one is, you know, got a decent number of people on our email list for that one. So that'll be coming here fairly soon as well. And then the Stipula Passaporto has a good little following as well. This is actually the Passaporto from a number of years ago, which we never actually carried here. It was kind of on the outs when we started getting involved with Stipula, so we never got into it. And it was $100 at the time, but they are revamping it a little bit, making it more economical. The old one used to be cartridge and eyedropper. The new one will only be eyedropper. It will not take a cartridge. That was, I believe, part of the compromise for lowering the price, but it's going to be $40 list price, so it's going to be much lower in price, which I think is going to be really popular. And just to give you kind of perspective of this pen, you know, here it is, and then it's got the little screw on the back, so you can cap it. And then it makes it a pretty decent sized pen. Even me with my big hands, it works on there. If I don't have the cap on the back, then it's a little unwieldy, but that works pretty well. And then to give you some perspective, you know, here it is next to a Kaweco Sport. This is an Ice Sport here, so you can see it's significantly shorter than that. And the Kaweco Lilliput, which is one of the tiniest pens out there, not as thin as a Lilliput, but it's actually a little bit shorter than the Lilliput even. So very, very tiny pen. Clear. It's going to be in a couple different colors, as well as there's going to be a matte black one that's going to be pretty sweet. So I'm pumped about that, and we're excited to get those in fairly soon as well. And then kind of the last thing I wanted to mention was we're going to have Monograppa Game of Thrones. We got some samples in. We got some pics on our site, looking pretty darn good. And we'll have those towards the end of this month. I don't have an exact date for that yet, but I know people are pretty pumped about that. So then there's all kinds of other stuff that's going to be coming out as well. It's going to be a pretty exciting month. I know TWSBI, the mini all blues, and you know, some of that kind of stuff is going to be coming later as well. So many of the things that I know that are coming, the dates are tentative and up in the air. So get on the email notification list. That's going to be the best thing for you to be notified as soon as we have any of this stuff in stock. All right, let's get into it. Last week I had all pen and writing questions. This week I went for a really good variety. So we got a good little mix, fewer questions than normal. So we'll see if I still take a full amount of time to do a Q&A here. Lately I've been spilling over an hour, and it's like, all right, Brian, get on with it here. First question is from Earl M on Facebook. Earl asks, is it bad to fully dismantle piston fillers, like a Lamy 2000 or a TWSBI 580, every change of ink? I'm worried about ink contamination, but some people warn about possible, wear and tear on the screw threads. The reason I fully dismantle my pens is simply because washing the parts is much faster than moving the piston repeatedly. I hear you on that one. Got myself a couple of piston fillers right here. So I got a Lamy 2000. I'm a huge fan of the Lamy 2000. I really don't recommend that you remove the piston out of the Lamy 2000. Reason being because I have personally stripped the threads on the piston rod of a Lamy 2000, and it's very easy to do. I really don't recommend that you take the piston out because you are at great risk of ruining it. And then you have to get it serviced and all this kind of stuff, and it's just going to take you a while, and you'll be without your sweet pen for a long time. So the one thing that you can do to make the Lamy 2000 easier to clean is you unscrew the nib unit. Be careful not to lose a trim ring because it will want to pop off there, and then you won't be able to cap your pen again. It's not just decorative, it's functional. And then you can fill this part, and then you can kind of shake it like that, just like you're cleaning the cap of your pen, and you can dump it that way, use a Q-tip, swab it out. That will get the job done without having to remove the piston out of it. So any piston filler where you can remove the nib unit or remove the nib or something like that, and you can get at it that way, that's a really good way to flush it. You can use an ink syringe or something like a eyedropper sometimes, or here's an ink syringe, so I can fill this with water, and then I can just take and I can flush the inside section of my pen here. That's a really good trick to avoid actually dismantling the pen. So the Lamy 2000, since you called it out specifically, I will say please don't do that. But the 580, you absolutely can. TWSBI specifically designs this pen to be user serviceable. So all you got to do is unscrew the back here, and where's my TWSBI wrench? Here it is. You insert this on the back. Which direction does this go? I can never remember. Okay, clockwise. Here we go. Voila, you take that out, you do your thing. You put it back in. As long as you're not being aggressive with it and like stripping or over tightening the threads, you should be able to take this on and off all day long. So I wouldn't sweat it too much with your TWSBI, especially because the TWSBI is, what, a third the price of a Lamy 2000. So you're really going to be okay there. The thing you have to watch out with the TWSBI is, if you actually remove this piston rod when you take the pen apart, that can be a bit of a beast to get back together. I've got some videos on that you can check out about how to actually put it back together. And what I'm talking about is this rod. So if you unscrew it to a certain point, that rod will pop out. And if you put it back in the wrong place, it won't end up seated in the correct position. That gets a little annoying. But if you are able to kind of keep it together as one unit, you shouldn't end up in that position. But you're not really going to strip the threads just by screwing and unscrewing it the way that it's properly supposed to be done. And here I go. I thought I was going to look all smooth by doing it. Which way does it go again? I can never remember. There we go. I was screwing it the wrong direction. Okay. It helps if you go with the threads instead of the opposite direction of them. There we go. Oh yes, beautiful, beautiful. So that would be my recommendation. You can do your TWSBI all day long, and that pretty much goes for all the TWSBIs. Pretty much all the TWSBIs that you can do that with. Other pens, it's going to be a calculated risk. There's some pens that I've been able to successfully remove the piston mechanisms out of the back. For example, the Pelikan M800. Now, this is not an official Pelikan thing. Do not say that I told you how to do this, but you can actually use a TWSBI wrench on the back of a Pelikan M800. Oh, who knew? It's actually the exact same. So I can remove. I wouldn't recommend doing this with the M600, 400, or 200, but voila, it's a very similar kind of mechanism, right? Like obviously the parts are different and stuff, but the design is essentially similar for pretty much all piston mechanisms. But there you go. So it's got a nice little notch in there. So if it has a notch that's kind of built in and they make it to be taken apart and you have the correct tool, the risk is relatively low. But on other pens, like for example, I'll show you the M600, part of the reason the M800 goes up in price is because you get metal components in there. The 600 still has a lot of plastic components on here, and they don't have any notches cut into this rod back here, so I can't actually grab onto anything. So theoretically, I could remove it, but I don't even know if it screws into there. It might actually snap into place, so I don't know that I have a good way to easily remove that. I haven't done any hacking on my M600 here, and the 200 and 400, I don't think they have the same mechanism, or they definitely don't have the same mechanism, I should say, as the M800. So don't know about the 1000, but you can do it on the 800 with a TWSBI wrench, and then I've also used it on my Pilot Custom 823. It does that as well. Now it's a vacuum filling pen, it's a little bit different, but you can still remove it out of the back. So it's always a calculated risk whenever you're taking your pen apart. And then the only other piston fill that I have that is really kind of meant to be user serviceable is the Noodler's Ahab and Conrad Napontet. You know, they are designed to be taken apart with no tools at all. I mean, you can just unscrew the piston right off the back here. It almost looks like a converter. Some people call it a converter. It's really not, because it doesn't accept cartridges. It's not converting anything. It's a piston. It's just a removable piston mechanism. So if you want to eyedropper convert it or whatever, you can. It's very easy to do that. But that's the other pen that I have that's very easily taken apart. And I do enjoy it for that purpose. But the thing that I'm going to say about piston filling pens and changing them out and changing ink constantly, I personally have really gotten away from using my piston filling pens for changing out ink colors a lot. You know, really, if you think about the reason they design these pens to hold a large volume of ink like that is because it's meant to be used for a long period of time with the same ink. So, you know, if you think about it, you're almost like kind of going against what the pen was designed for when you're constantly changing out colors with these things. I love, you know, the cartridge converter pens like a Lamy Vista or Safari or All-Star, for example, because you can use one color, you take out the converter, you do a bulb syringe, and you just blast water through it, the thing's clean, and then you're ready to go and you can change colors. So I love cartridge converters for testing out different colors and swapping my colors a lot. Because honestly, the way that I roll is that I'll fill my converter like maybe halfway, and then by the time it even gets halfway down from there, I'll use it and I'm like, I want to try this other color over here, and I dump it and I keep going, you know. So it's like, I would never fill a piston filling pen all the way to the brim on any color that I wasn't like planning on pretty much dedicating to using that pen for a while. And that's just because I like to swap my colors a lot, and that's just how it goes. Now, certain pens that are piston filling like that, like I have a Lamy 2000 at home that I use with Noodler's Black, and that's just what stays in it all the time. And it's rare that I even clean it out, and when I do, I just kind of do a gentle flushing of it, and then I just fill it again and don't go crazy. But, you know, you're concerned about contamination. I wouldn't really sweat that too much, especially if you're flushing and flushing, you know, a few times, and you know, when you're flushing, especially with a piston filling pen, if you flush it and you get to the point where you're taking a paper towel and you're dabbing it to the nib and it's coming out and it's very little color, you know, even if there's a tiny bit of color, if there's very little color, you're probably going to be just fine. I know if you're anal retentive and you want to make sure every little bit of ink is out of there, and certainly if you're using inks that you know are not well compatibility with each other, like a Bay State ink with a non-Bay State ink, you know, Noodler's Bay State, or if you have an Iron Gall ink and you're switching to something else, then I would recommend cleaning it as absolutely thoroughly as possible. But if you're just switching from a light blue to a dark blue, I wouldn't really go crazy trying to clean every single little last speck out of it. You're going to be just fine cleaning it thoroughly and then, you know, dabbing it. And if there's a tiniest bit of color in there, it's not going to ruin your pen or anything like that in all likelihood, unless you get into some ridiculous incompatibility issue, which I don't think is likely to happen. So you don't really need to go to extremes of completely dismantling the pen every time you change a color. You know, that's really just your prerogative if you choose to do that. It's really going to be your call, but you got some other options there. All right, this next question is from Rickey A on Facebook. What are the benefits of a titanium nib over steel? Gold nibs I get. The softer material provides more flex and a potentially more buttery smooth writing experience. What good is using a nib harder than steel? Is it corrosion-related thing, or is it just the style and panache that people are after? So I touched on this a little bit. I mentioned in the intro and Q&A here that I got a video out on the titanium nibs, specifically the Keras Customs ones, but there are some other brands that do have some titanium nibs. Not a lot. I feel like it's something that you know, is gaining in popularity. You know, I first became a titanium nib, aware of titanium nibs with Stipula, because they had their Stipula T-Flex nib, which I have a Model T with a T-Flex, I have a Da Vinci with a T-Flex, and now the Etruria 88, the rainbow one, is coming out, which is also going to be in very hot demand. There's only 88 pens of them worldwide, and we're getting a few. So those are coming with a titanium nib on them as well, which I expect to perform exactly like the Keras Customs ones, because as far as I'm aware, Bock is the only manufacturer that makes a titanium nib, and all of the nibs that I've seen are identical to this one. So I suspect they will all write the same. I haven't written with every single titanium nib in the world, but Maybe they do. Also, Omos used to have a titanium nib. Never used theirs, but may they rest in peace. And then there's some independent pen makers. You know, Keras Customs is one of them. Conid, Carolina Pens. I've seen some of them use it. I imagine they're probably using the Bach nib and just putting it on their format of pen. So, so this will kind of address a lot of those. Yes, as a metal, titanium is harder than steel. It's lighter than steel, but, and I don't know all the science behind it because I haven't actually talked to the nib manufacturers, but my practical experience in having used titanium nibs is that they are softer feeling than steel nibs, which kind of sounds kooky, but if you think about it like, when you're using gold nibs, like traditional flex gold nibs, a lot of the flex gold nibs you'll see today will actually be 14 karat and not 18 karat. Now 18 karat gold is technically more gold content, which is a softer metal, which means the nib should write softer. Why are flexible nibs 14 karat? Well, they actually need a slightly harder metal to be able to do the forming and the thinning that they do in order to get the nib to be more flexible. So it's a little bit counterintuitive. They need a harder metal in order to make it more flexible, but because you're not just trying to get initial softness, you're trying to get spring back too. So that's where a harder metal can actually come in and be an advantage. So I think they're making these nibs in a way that it is actually a little bit more flexible. And that's been my experience with the titanium nibs. It's not just a rock hard, stiffer than the stiffest steel nib pen. That's not how it feels in practical writing. I do find they tend to be just a little bit toothier, which you can smooth those out. Like I've, taken it to micromesh and you can even go Mylar and you can make it very, very smooth. That's just a matter of the tipping material, and that doesn't really have any impact based on the titanium itself because the tipping material's, some iridium type alloy. So that you can make it smoother. But in terms of the actual kind of bounciness, softness, springiness, whatever you want to call it as you're writing, it's actually, closer to gold than it is to steel. So, and price-wise, it ends up being kind of about halfway too. I think about a pen like Edison where, you get a steel nib that comes on the pen, you can pay $125 to upgrade to a gold nib, 18 karat nib, and a titanium nib unit from Keras Customs is $60. So it kind of falls in between there. Now, the nib housing unit, I feel like I have to say this, the nib housing unit is Bach and Edison uses Jovo. It's a different thread pattern, so it won't thread right into the Edison, but you can take the nib out and you can put it on the same size. Anyway, you can actually pull the nib out of the housing like I demonstrated in the video, and it's a bit of a hack, but I figure if you're getting into titanium nibs and wanting to switch and swap, you're in hack-worthy territory there anyway. So that's what I wanted to kind of cover there. Corrosion, you mentioned that. Yes, sure, it's going to have better corrosion. I don't know anybody that's like jazzed up about the corrosion resistance of titanium nib. That's not why I think people are going for it, but certainly that could be a benefit of it, especially if you wanted to use something like an iron gall ink that over time, could corrode steel more than gold or more than titanium. I don't know if titanium or gold would be better in that situation, but maybe worth it to you to do that. But I think it's also definitely a style thing. Titanium is cool. It's got a specific look to it. It's got kind of this matte gray kind of design, so it fits nicely, especially with the Keras Customs line where you've got this very machine kind of industrial look to it. So I think it fits well with that. Yeah, that should pretty much cover it. So I don't think it's going to be for everybody, but I do think that there's going to be a bunch of people that are going to enjoy those nibs. All right, let's move away from pens and go to ink, shall we? Cat KO3 on Instagram asks, I can't tell how much ink is left in the cartridge or if it's just staining the sides. I have a midterm next week that has to be completely written out over 8 pages, and I'm afraid of running out during the exam, but I don't want to put in a brand new cartridge as I finally want to use a converter. It would be a waste of good ink. Okay, so you're talking about when should you switch to a converter? You have a cartridge, you don't know how long it's been in there. My experience has been if you can't tell how much is in there, it's either full or it's pretty close to empty and it's just all dried up and crusty looking. And if it's full, it's usually pretty easy. If you can see it kind of sloshing back and forth, that's great. If you can't see it sloshing back and forth, that means it's probably been in there a while and is pretty dried up, and you should just take it out and toss it anyway, and then flush your pen. And then you can do whatever you want. You can put in another cartridge, you can put in a converter. The thing I'll say, you know, I never wrote out 8 pages of like a exam or anything like that because I didn't discover fountain pens until after I was out of college. So I kind of wish I had discovered pens during my college experience, because I think I would have enjoyed school a lot more had I had a cool pen to write with. But anyway, laptops weren't really a great option back then because they were still pretty expensive. I went to school in college from 2002 to 2006. So there were laptops, but they weren't reliable, and they were pretty expensive and pretty clunky. So they weren't great options to carry around. So I read everything out by just cruddy, you know, ballpoint pens and stuff like that. So wasn't the best writing experience for me. But anyway, if you got fountain pens, you got the exam, I would think that you would probably want to focus more on what it is you're actually writing on your exam than if you're going to be running out of ink. So I would say whatever solution that you approach should be whatever gives you the most peace of mind. So a couple of different options for you. You know, you can just fill up the converter and hope for the best. I do think that you would be able to make it through an 8-page exam on a single converter fill, unless you have some flex nib or some really broad wet nib and it's just a really absorbent paper and it's just using a lot more ink than normal. But you definitely should be able to write 8 pages longhand with a single converter fill. But, you know, depending on those factors, it may be close enough where it would start to cause you mental duress, you know, to be that close, and you'd rather just have another option. So I think one of the best options would be if you have a second pen, just fill your other pen and bring it, and then if you start to run out, you can switch. Of course, I don't know if a professor is going to like if it's 2 different colors or something like that. It might kind of wig them out. I think that should be taken into consideration. Choose a color that's not going to be like hot pink or something that's going to be like, ugh, they're not going to want to read that. Go with something a little more conservative. But I would try to go consistent on the color between the 2 pens if you have 2 pens. But say you don't have 2 pens. Okay, you only have 1 pen. Well, you could always bring a different pen as a backup, a ballpoint or something like that. Rollerball, whatever. I shouldn't even say ballpoint because that's such a travesty, but I'm just kidding. But that's certainly an option. Another option is you could just go straight up cartridges, and then you can bring extra cartridges. You know, that way, if you do happen to fill one, and you know, use one up, then you can do it. Just using standard international cartridges as an example, like I have here, the amount that you're going to fill in a converter is pretty close to what you're going to get in a cartridge anyway. So it's not like you're really gaining one way or the other. It's just the convenience with a cartridge that if you start to run out, you can pop another one in and keep going. So that may be worth it to you if you're in a situation, this one or anywhere else, where you need to kind of be on the go and not sweating too much your ink level. You know, I doubt your professor would be super impressed if you busted out your ink bottle in the middle of a class and went to refill it. Or maybe they would, I don't know. Some professors are really into fountain pens and they may give you bonus points or something if they see you using fountain pen. But anyway, I digress. So you could certainly do that. Another, you know, kind of cool thing, I'm just going to use this Jinhao as an example. If you have a pen that is long enough to accommodate a long standard international converter, then you can actually take 2 short ones if you have them, and you can take one and you can turn it backwards and drop it in your pen, and then the other one you can pop it into your pen and you can fit actually 2 converters worth in your pen, so you don't even have to cart around extra cartridges. But probably if you're going to class, you have a backpack and you can easily have, you know, cartridges handy if you want to do that. But just that was a neat little trick that I wanted to show you there. So I think you've got some really good options here. You know, of course, you're going to do whatever you need to do. You should probably spend a lot more time studying and less time worrying about your pen. But I don't know, maybe you're really smart. Maybe you don't have to study. I had to study like a fiend when I was in school, and I still got like B's. You know, I was never an amazing student. I'm much more a real life working kind of guy. I just didn't really get the school thing, but those are my recommendations for you. I think you're going to be great. I think you're going to just ace your tests and just go with whatever pen solution makes you happy. All right. I got a troubleshooting question for this week. So this is Sam Third on Instagram. I received an E95S as a Christmas gift, and the nib is out of alignment. I've taken my Goulet loop and straightened them out, but it seems like as soon as I write with it again, it's back out of alignment. I do not write with a heavy hand and have had no issues with alignment out of other pens that I own. So my question is, once a nib has alignment issues, is it more likely to suffer from future alignment issues, or is this possibility a problem that is unique to this pen? All right, Sam. Well, it's not a problem that's unique to this pen. And the good thing is, it's not like once you have an alignment issue, the pen is forever going to be misaligned. I do think that is your situation in this case. I think you are trying to fix it. Now, believe me, I think you're doing a great job, and I support you, and keep it up. But I think that if you are continually having it where it's going out of alignment and you're not, over-rotating it and causing pressure or doing anything like that, if you're just writing with it delicately and like normal as you should, if it's out of alignment, that means you never really got it back into alignment. Now, what happens sometimes, especially this is a gold nibs are soft. So what happens if you get nib tines and one goes out of alignment, I don't know which one you're dealing with, but let's say one's out of alignment, and you go to straighten it back up and you get it there and it looks great. They're pressed onto each other, they're holding on, and then as soon as you touch it down to the paper again, it's going to do that. Now, why is it doing that? Because if you're only bending it up a little bit to kind of match up to where it is, that tine could just be kind of hugging and kind of grabbing onto the other one while still actually being out of alignment. So the metal around the whole tine could actually be too far down, and all you're doing is kind of taking it up and just grabbing it onto the other one. And then of course, as soon as you touch it down to the paper, they spread out just a little bit, and that tine wants to go back to where it naturally wants to go. So if it's truly out of alignment, what you need to do to correct it is actually bend it beyond the point where you want it to end up. Because it's metal, it's soft. It's sort of like if you have, oh gosh, I'm trying to think of some other situation, like a paper clip, and you're trying to straighten out a paper clip or something like that. You don't just get it to the point where it needs to be, you bend it past where it needs to be, and then it goes back a little bit. That's what you're doing with the tines, and the softer the metal, the more you need to do that. That's why working on gold nibs, titanium nibs, things like that, flex nibs, those are more difficult to work on because you aren't just aligning it up to where it is. Steel nibs, you only have to go a little bit past. Gold nibs, you have to kind of go like more than you feel you're comfortable to get past. And then it's like you might go too far and then it's the other way, and you have to kind of play with it. So when you start messing with gold nibs like this, it gets like, when you start bending the tines. But the thing is, like these are metal, right? Like they are delicate, but they're also not. Like they're metal. They have very specific physical characteristics related to metal, and you can bend it and you can bend it back. And unless you do it like 1,000 times, you're going to be able to bend it and bend it back again. So it's like just because it's out of alignment a little bit doesn't mean that it's forever going to want to go out of alignment. If you can correct it properly and get it to where it's actually matched back up, then it's not going to want to throw itself out of alignment again, unless there is actually something that you're doing while you're writing with it inadvertently that's causing it to go out of alignment. That's pretty rare. It doesn't happen, especially usually that instantly. Usually it's happening if you are over-rotating and then writing with too much pressure, and you're putting more pressure on one tine than the other. So that's just something for you to watch. I know you said you didn't have that issue, and I'm not accusing you of having that issue, but just for everybody else's sake. This is something that you can kind of be educated about. But while you're writing, I've noticed from observing a lot of other people watching them write, that a lot of people have a tendency to rotate the pen in their hand inadvertently as they're writing. And you don't even notice it until somebody else can observe it and be like, nope, you are over-rotating. And you're like, oh dang, you're right. And a lot of times I hear about flow issues and scratchiness and stuff like that. And I'll even observe people, even people that work here, sometimes. And they're like, man, this nib just is scratchy and something like that. And I'm just like, turn it a little bit. I'm like, try it now. Oh my gosh, it feels amazing. Yes, because sometimes it is sensitive to the way that it's writing like that. So that would be the first thing I would try. Now, granted, anytime that you're adjusting your own nibs and stuff like that, you gotta be aware that you're taking your nibs life into your own hands, and if you do something crazy, you could cause more harm than good. So make sure that you're comfortable doing whatever it is you're doing. Of course, if you feel like it's a manufacturing defect or something like that, contact us if you bought it from us or whoever else, or you can contact, you know, Pilot directly, Pilot USA down in Florida. You can contact them, send it to them, they can align it and stuff like that. So if you are comfortable doing it yourself, then I would say probably what I suspect your situation is, you need to go up a little bit more on it so that it will get properly seated back to where it is, and then as you write, it won't be trying to go back to where it was before. That is what I think. All right, got a business question. So this is from becozimwurthit. Because I'm worth it. Just got that. Okay, cool. I love Instagram. Okay, because I'm worth it. Does GPC consider the ethics of pens and manufacturers when you take on products? Ooh, good question. For example, some pens come with a lot of packaging, which can be wasteful, or there can be pens made out of ivory. I'm not aware of a lot of those. I buy fountain pens, all modern ones, but hand on heart, should we consider more the environmental impact of pen and ink manufacturer? Most of the environmental impact seems to be in raw materials manufacture rather than disposal, so it might indicate fountain pens and inks are not particularly environmentally friendly. Ooh. What does GPC manage in the way of recycling? Thoughts? Well, you got a nice little group of questions in there because I'm worth it. And I would like to address as many of them as I can. First off, I'm going to say that I don't really know of a lot of ivory pens, especially like genuine ivory. There's a lot of imitation ivory, not even a lot. There's some imitation ivory out there. And as far as I'm aware, as long as you have ivory that was harvested responsibly, and usually that's like certified in some manner, because I can't speak for every country, but I believe that harvesting ivory is illegal pretty much everywhere. But I believe that you can get ivory in some ethical means, and then it's usually certified in some way. There might be some like crazy limited edition things that are made of ivory that were harvested with some naturally whatever harvested ivory. But that's definitely not common. Like I can't even name you a single pen that's made of ivory. So I don't know that that's really an issue. So there's that. As far as the environmental stuff goes, I think it's a factor. I don't know how much really of a factor it is for most people when getting pens. For one thing, pens are relatively small, and fountain pens themselves are sold in a relatively small quantity when you compare, ballpoint and rollerball pens, which make up probably 99% of the writing instruments in the world. So personally, I like to be aware as I can as what's going on, especially if there's gross misconduct or ethical stuff like that going on. That really has not been my observation. I've never really had anything on my radar that's raised flags for me as far as how things are manufactured. I think because most fountain pen manufacturers and ink manufacturers and stuff like that are relatively eco-conscious. Now I can't say that, like, the difficult thing about this is you're usually not dealing with large companies. Sometimes there are fountain pen brands that are owned by large conglomerates like Newell Rubbermaid or whatever, and Chart Pack and some other very large companies. But they're usually a distributor. They're not necessarily manufacturing, so they might be responsible for some of the packaging, but maybe not the manufacture, the raw materials themselves. I haven't toured a lot of like raw material manufacturing parts of a lot of these companies. But as far as I understand, it's not a overly wasteful process, but it's hard to say. I think about the amount of plastic that might be used in a pen like this, and then like the number of bottles of water that are drunk every day and what happens to those. I think it's relatively minor compared to that. And then, there's a number of brands that, I know we work with, especially ones that are coming out of Europe. They tend to be pretty eco-conscious. Like I think about like Rhodia, Clairefontaine, J.R. Bond, the ink maker. They like really go through, they are like PEFC certified, and they do a lot of like sustainable, harvesting of trees and stuff when they make paper. And, J.R. Bond doesn't use biocides in their ink. And so there's a lot more of that kind of has been going on. So just in general, the fountain pen industry doesn't in my experience, has not struck me as like big business manufacturing, let's go after it. It's not like, you know, you think big oil or something like that when you think of harming the environment. Not to say that it couldn't be having some impact on it, but I think if you wanted to kind of really go extreme with it and go, I want to make sure that I'm having, you know, zero carbon neutral, that kind of stuff, you're gonna have to dig a little bit deeper, and you may just like not be able to buy something because you just won't get any answers about whether it is or not. What happens a lot of times is a lot of these fountain pen manufacturers are really pretty small companies that just don't have the funds or the resources to go through the certifications and to do all the stuff to become certified for, you know, all this low impact or no impact, you know, ecological stuff. So I think that's usually something larger businesses have the means to do. Now that said, like I think about like Robert Oster, they're an ink manufacturer in Australia, and they buy their bottles from a company that has a zero carbon footprint. You know, even though they're plastic bottles, it's still a carbon neutral company that makes their bottles. So like there's cool things like that that are nice, but usually, you know, there are a lot of different fountain pen options, but at the same time, in terms of like all pens, the number of fountain pens that are available is relatively small. So you kind of like don't always get to be so picky unless like that is your number one mission in life, is to be, you know, completely neutral on the environment. And then you're gonna have to, you know, you're gonna have a harder time because you won't necessarily be able to get that answer that yes, that is what you're achieving by buying pretty much any brand, because I haven't really seen, especially pen brands, that have like that kind of extreme of a classification for environmental impact. Maybe that will change over the years as it becomes like even more important to companies and to countries that are, you know, trying to develop that. But at least at this point, that's not really where we're at. And then you asked specifically about like, what are we doing here at Goulet in that respect? So, you know, it's kind of the same thing. It's like we do what we can. You know, it's not like the reason we started this business, but it's certainly something that as our business has grown, we become more cognizant of that kind of stuff. So we do recycling here. I have a separate, you know, collection, a trash collection that is just for recycling. Like we have a regular dumpster, and then we have a recycled dumpster. So we have all of our cardboard, you know, certain types of, you know, well, actually most plastics. I think it goes all the way through number 7 or 8. Like our local area is pretty good about recycling, you know, and then so a lot of plastics and aluminum and all that kind of stuff. So we, you know, we have trash collection, and then we have recycling collection. We have a lot of recycle bins around our office. And so we do that, and it's probably, you know, it's close to 50-50 in terms of recycling and trash that we generate here. So that's kind of cool. So we try to do that. I absolutely hate packing peanuts. We try to use as little styrofoam as possible. In fact, you'll pretty much never see styrofoam coming from us in your packing materials. We use a lot of recycled plastics. The bubble wrap that we use is one that we've tried a lot of different iterations of eco-friendly packing materials. Too often we end up having to sacrifice a lot on price or quality of packing materials, but we have some bubble wrap now that we're really happy with. That is, we actually manufacture the, well, not the plastic part, but we actually inflate the bubble wrap ourselves. We have a special machine, and we buy the bubble wrap in basically long sheets, and then we put it on this machine, in rolls I should say, and then we put it on this machine, and it inflates the bubble wrap and creates these big rolls. It's the craziest looking machine you've ever seen. But that allows us not only to have a smaller footprint in terms of not having to send large trucks filled with bubble wrap to our facility, we can get a small delivery of just this plastic wrap, and then we can inflate the bubbles ourselves. That saves some carbon footprint. And then the material itself is actually, I think it's about 15% recycled material, and then it's also recyclable. So that is a big plus, because the stuff that we used to use it wasn't, you know, unrecyclable, but it was like one of the higher numbers that not all places took. So now I forget what number it is, but I think it's like number 2 or 3 or something like that. So it's recyclable at pretty much most places. So that's pretty cool. And then of course our corrugated cardboard is what we use for all of our boxes. That's very recyclable. Oftentimes it's made of recycled materials as well, or partially recycled materials, so that's pretty cool. The ink sample vials that we use are recyclable as well. And then of course we are making a lot of recycle initiatives around here. So that's the stuff that we're currently trying to do here. And then of course just by, you know, being online, that helps, because, you know, not having a physical storefront. We don't have a lot of people driving to our store every day, so that's saving some gas, I guess. But you know, that's you could probably argue for that. But those are the initiatives that we're doing currently here. And then, of course, we, you know, use fluorescent lighting as opposed to incandescent and stuff like that. We're looking into a lot of LED lighting options as well. The pricing gets a little kooky there, and there's a long payback period for some of that. So certainly things to consider. But whenever we have ballasts that are starting to go bad, we put, you know, more economical, not economical in terms of cost, but like more whatever power friendly, less power hungry, you know, ballast in our lights and things like that. So we're trying to be cognizant of that with everything else that we're trying to balance out. All right, and then the last question for this week, I'm gonna take a sip of water before I get into it. This is from Potato on YouTube. Maybe it's Potato, I don't know. It's hard to say, it's spelled the same. But anyway, cool name on YouTube. I know this isn't about pens, but I was wondering, what was Brian Goulet's first job? My first job. Well, I actually had kind of a hard time answering this question because I don't know what you consider a first job to be. I've kind of worked a lot in my life, like many of you probably have. So I'll kind of just go through the spectrum and you can help me decide what my first job actually was. The first work that I was ever paid to do, if you consider that to be a job, I was probably about 5 years old, and my parents had a business in the house, and they you know, had me and my sister help out little odd jobs here and there. But most specifically what I remember doing is I would get paid a penny a piece to staple invoices to manila folders as my parents were filing for their different clients that they had. So, you know, I would staple and get a penny and staple and get a penny. And my parents actually had a like bank of mom and dad and with a little checkbook that had my name and my sister's name on it. And we had little checks and we would earn our, you know, couple of dollars or whatever. And then we'd go to the store and want to buy whatever piece of junk toy that we were excited about at 5 years old. And I would write my little check, you know, need help with it, obviously, but then I would buy it. So my parents were trying to teach us money management and working and work ethic and all that kind of stuff. And I guess it worked because look where I'm at here. But that's something really cool that that I've done. I haven't done the checkbook thing with my kids, but I do, you know, have, I don't call them chores, but I have, you know, jobs for them around the house, and I pay them commissions for the jobs that they do. So they get paid for doing things. You know, they're young, so it's things like, you know, dressing themselves and cleaning their room and cleaning up the room and making their lunch and stuff like that. You know, I'll have those things on a list, excuse me, and they'll get paid to do that stuff. So that was the kind of stuff I first started out doing. So technically you could consider that my first job. Really, like once I really started working more when I was more like 9 years old, 10 years old. My parents, again, had the business in the house, and they had, one of their bigger clients that they had was a deck building company that was local in the area here. So they would build decks, and there were lots of different franchises of people that would go out and build these really, really nice decks. And so they had lots of brochures that they printed up, because my parents, they were in the desktop publishing business. So they would design brochures and flyers and magazines and catalogs and all that kind of stuff. This was in the mid-90s. So they had a lot of these franchise, you know, customers that would get these flyers, and they would get their addresses printed on them, and then get them mailed to them so they could mail them out to all their customers. So my parents would print up the flyers, but there needed to be what's called overprinting. So they would print up a generic flyer, and then there was an empty space where you would then print the address of the franchise. And so my parents taught me to manage the computer system and how to take an order that would come and go and get the proper brochure and put it in and actually print out the address. And then we had a folding machine, you know, where you'd feed these things in a specific way, and it would like trifold or bifold these flyers. And then I would box them all up and have to mail them out to the respective, you know, franchise. And so that was something that my parents taught me how to do. I could hardly recall how to do it now, but apparently at the time I was able to do it. But they taught me how to do that, and I kind of managed that myself and made some decent little money as a 9 or 10-year-old. And I would do things like mow the lawns, you know, for neighbors. And my parents, you know, company, once they moved out of the house, they had a building, and I would mow the lawn there and got paid pretty decent there. So did a lot of little odd jobs and stuff like that. But technically the first job that I had once I was, you know, working outside of kind of my parents' little world, I was 16. I really wanted to get a car, obviously, because what 16-year-old doesn't, in the US anyway. My dad and my sister had some incidences with their driving records prior to that, and so basically with their driving records and then me being a 16-year-old male, the insurance company was basically like, yeah, no, we're not going to insure you. And I was like, what the heck? And they were like, no, we're just not even going to give you the option. So I did not have the ability to drive when I was 16. At least my own car. I could drive my parents around, but I couldn't have my own car. So the summer that after I turned 16, I wanted to work. I didn't have a car, so I had no real expenses. So I worked 3 jobs that summer, and I worked at YMCA as a swimming instructor and lifeguard, and then I worked at Hallmark, like the greeting card store. I worked at Hallmark. I was a stock boy and would ring people up at the register and all that kind of stuff, answer their questions about when the Christmas figurines were coming out in July and all the Precious Moments kid, you know, figurines and stuff like that. That's what I did. Smelling all the Yankee candles. That Macintosh when I was hungry, and I was like a teenager because I was hungry, always hungry. So I'd be like working my shift or whatever, and I would just like smell the candles, and I was like, I'm so hungry right now. Anyway. And then the other place that I worked was Domino's Pizza, answering phones. So I worked all 3 of those, riding my bike about 8 miles into town each way. I would ride my bike into town, go work any of my 3 jobs, sometimes all 3 of them in a day, and then ride back home. I saved up a ton of money, and then, you know, eventually I was able to drive. But there was that. And then I worked at Radio Shack when I was, you know, junior and senior in high school. And then when I got to college, I worked a whole slew of jobs. I worked at Food Lion as a stock boy. I worked at oh my gosh, the worst job I ever had was cleaning restaurant hoods. That was disgusting. It was working in the middle of the night. The people were not good to work with. So that was my worst job I ever had. I worked at a catering company, washing dishes at Virginia Tech and setting up for banquets and things like that. I did handyman stuff. I, you know, did power washing. I did deck sealing. I really did everything I could just to try to make it through school. And then once I graduated, I worked with my dad power washing houses, started making pens on the side as a hobby, which grew into the Goulet Pen Company, and so on. So depending on what you consider to define first job, I pretty much took you through my whole career path there, but whatever you consider to be first job, I don't really know which of those fall into that. I don't really consider myself to have had like a real job like most people would consider, like a job like you graduate from school and you go out and you work your 9 to 5 kind of thing. I've never had that. Literally never in my life. Even now, being that we have an office that's open 8 to 5, but I work the craziest of hours. So I've really never had just a regular 9 to 5 job. But that's kind of how I want it. I'm kind of wired that way, as you can see, because that's kind of how I was raised and how I was bred, was to, you know, work and do all this crazy stuff. So that's the Brian Goulet history here anyway. So that's it for this week. We're gonna cut it a little bit short anyway. I still managed to take it pretty long. But my question of the week for this week is, what was your first job? Whatever you interpret that to be. I'd love to hear about it. Not a pen related thing at all, but just go ahead and answer, you know, talk about yourself a little bit. That'd be kind of cool to hear. Be sure to check out gouletpens.com for all the pens I talked about here. There's going to be a lot of new stuff coming out in the next several weeks, so be sure to sign up for email notification lists for all that kind of stuff. Leave questions in the comments down below on YouTube or on the blog. If you have any questions about anything, it'd be great to hear. Thanks so much for spending time with me, for hanging out. Really enjoyed it this week. And I hope you have a great weekend and a great rest of the week. Right on.